The most fundamental piece that cuts across every one of those risks and threats that you mentioned that I think Americans need to understand is that something that's very sacred in our country, the difference between the private sector and the public sector, that's a line that is non-existent in the way the CCP operates.
I'll start with you, Director Wray. Let me ask you, as I'm sure, I know you're familiar with this, the most downloaded app in the world, one of the most downloaded app in the world is a social media company, TikTok. Could the Chinese government, through its ownership of ByteDance, that owns ByteDance US, if they wanted to, and ByteDance US were willing to cooperate or forced to cooperate, could they use TikTok to control data on millions of users?
Yes.
Could they use it to control the software on millions of devices, given the opportunity to do so?
Yes.
Could they use it to drive narratives, like to divide Americans against each other? Or, for example, let's say China wants to invade Taiwan, to make sure that Americans are seeing videos arguing why Taiwan belongs to China and why the U.S. should not intervene?
Yes, and I would make the point on that last one in particular that we're not sure that we would see many of the outward signs of it happening if it was happening. And I think the most fundamental piece that cuts across every one of those risks and threats that you mentioned that I think Americans need to understand is that something that's very sacred in our country, the difference between the private sector and the public sector, that's a line that is non-existent in the way the CCP operates.
Do you think it's valuable to look at how TikTok operates in China versus the U.S.? For example, in the U.S., kids are being encouraged to choke themselves out. We've had kids die in China. They're encouraged to focus on math and science and building the country. Is that an example of how two different versions of TikTok, one feeding our society poison and the other inculcating positive values, an example of how potentially or in reality TikTok could be used to damage our country?
I think those are among many sort of telling indicators that we should be looking at in assessing the national security concerns this poses.
So they can collect our data, manipulate information, poison the minds and feed garbage into the minds of millions of people and so forth. Given the threat, I imagine this is the reason why TikTok is no longer allowed on federal devices pretty soon. No federal devices can have TikTok on it, correct?
Well, certainly at the FBI, TikTok never has been, and nor will it be approved. And I think it's my understanding that that's about to be in place across the entire federal government.
So given the weight of all this, does anyone in the panel disagree that TikTok is not a good thing for America? Well, if no one disagrees, my question is then, if TikTok is bad for America, and we've talked about all these disadvantages and potential harm that's caused by it, should the fact that it is popular among people under the age of 35 be the reason why we don't take strong action against it?
Not from my perspective.
Because that's what the Secretary of Commerce said is, that potentially we want to do something about this because it would upset people under the age of 35. So I guess my point, just tie it all up, is this is a substantial national security threat for the country of a kind that we didn't face in the past. So it's at the end of the day, it's not about some grown man in the middle of the day putting up videos, that people that have a job shouldn't be putting up. But it's also about all these other things that we've talked about, the data, the ability to manipulate information. I would imagine that it's probably one of the most valuable surveillance tools on the planet. I mean, if we went out and decided to build something like this of our own to influence or spy on another society, I'm not sure we could build something like this or even better. And we've invited them in and protected them by our laws. So I don't understand why this company is allowed to operate as long as it's owned. It's my understanding, and maybe Director Haynes, you can clarify this, but I think this is the case. Under Chinese law, any company, I don't care what the company is in China, that the Chinese government says, give me everything you have, they have no choice but to give it to them, or someone else will be in charge, correct? Okay. My time is remaining here. I want to talk a little bit about COVID and the pandemic. So here's what we know about COVID, okay? It originated in the city of Wuhan, where the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which has a questionable safety record and conducts experiments on making viruses that are not infectious in humans infectious in humans. They do it for the purpose of then developing a vaccine. They're located in that city. The Chinese CDC is also located in the city. Number two, unlike, for example, SARS, to this moment, unless it happened in the last hour, the Chinese have not been able to say, here's the bat, here's the pangolin, here's the animal that the virus came from. Number three, there is evidence, both in open source and I mean, it's been widely discussed that the Chinese, at a minimum, have not been, to say the least, open about any of this. And in fact, real clear indications that they've done everything possible to obstruct any sort of international inquiry into how this began or to be sharing this information. This is a lot of circumstantial evidence that adds together. And I believe that's why the FBI has concluded what on the origins of COVID, Director Ray?
So, Mr. Vice Chairman, as the committee knows, the FBI has long assessed, going all the way back to the summer of 2021, that the origin of the pandemic was likely a lab incident in Wuhan.
So, Director Haynes, I know that there's a difference of opinion among the different agencies. I think Energy and FBI have that assessment. Are we unable to, what is preventing the other agencies from reaching the same assessment? Is it basically the lack of a smoking gun? Will we not be able to say that we believe that the lab origin is the likeliest outcome unless somehow we can provide a smoking gun proof that that's what happened?
Thank you, sir. So you're right. There's a broad consensus in the intelligence community that the outbreak is not the result of a bioweapon or genetic engineering. What there isn't a consensus on is whether or not it's a lab leak, essentially as Director Ray indicated, or natural exposure to an infected animal. Those are the two operating sort of theories. And what would change, essentially elements' perspectives, I think it'd be additional information, and we've been trying to collect additional information. And I think you're absolutely right that China has not fully cooperated, and we do think that's a key critical gap that would help us to understand what exactly happened.
My time is up, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out that it is true that the lab leak, we don't have a smoking gun. Like we don't have some guy calling another guy saying, hey, we had a lab leak. We also don't have a smoking gun that it was a naturally occurring event, which is the easiest one for them to prove. Come out, have a press conference, show us the bat or the pangolin, whatever a pangolin is, and show us that this is the one and here's the virus that came from that animal. Because it would have not just been found in one animal, it would have been pretty widespread. That's the easiest thing for the Chinese to have done, and they haven't done it. I think that's a pretty strong reason to suspect that it's not naturally occurring because they've done it with the other pandemics. Thank you.